This video is brought to you by Adam and Eve. Go to adamandeve.com and use the promo code C at checkout to get 50% off one item and free shipping in the US and Canada.
Let's start the show.
He's so different and he's so him, but the freedom.
If you wanted to have a legend of a comedian, you would talk about a guy who created the greatest sketch show of all time. Then he goes away.
And the show went really well, like absurdly well. Like so well, you gotta go to Africa well.
I quit Chappelle Show in spectacular fashion.
Hey everybody, got an announcement to make. Ding, 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 ding. I quit.
He goes away like a mountain man. He vanishes. He does this for 10 years.
I was gone for a long time.
I watched the world go on without me. I mourned the loss of it. And after a while, I didn't care.
And then came back and immediately went right to the top. No one's ever done it better than Dave.
He said, in the time where the fire is the hottest, I'm going to do what nobody else will. Dave, you're the GOAT.
You the GOAT. You know you're the greatest.
Ladies and gentlemen, the GOAT, Mr. Dave Chappelle.
Anyway, this is weird and less than ideal.
Dave Chappelle's special 846 reminded us all what we already knew. Chappelle is more than just a comedian. He's a legend and an iconic figure, just one who also tells pussy jokes.
I don't care if he personally kicked Candace Owens and her stinky pussy.
This performance shows Dave's incredible flexibility as an artist. Not only was it filmed in the middle of a pandemic that has prevented stand-up comedy for months, but in his own words,
This is not funny at all.
the special only has a little bit of humor in it, and the rest contains a powerful and personal reflection on the Black Lives Matter protests. The performance reminds you of just how legendary Dave Chappelle is, that he can use his artistry in the most unexpected ways to do stand-up in the most unexpected situations, and he's always been this way. He did the same thing after quitting Chappelle's show.
He was doing stand-up in a park in Seattle. He'd show up with a fucking box
And just do it.
Plug a microphone into
just do it.
and just start doing stand-up.
Throughout his life, Chappelle has made more out of his career than just telling jokes, and in doing so, he's become more than a comedian. He's a legend. The risk-taking, the pressure, the comeback, the controversy, it all points to an epic narrative that transcends his own life. It's a story of a man perfecting his artistry, reaffirming his personal agency, and learning to perform his art on his own terms. And it's a story that's influenced by, and adds to, the narratives of other legendary African-American artists. Pretty much every article or video about Dave Chappelle focuses on the jokes he tells and whether they're funny or not funny. And that makes sense, since joke telling is the comedian's job. But I think that sells Dave Chappelle short. If he's really a legend and a thought leader, shouldn't we go deeper than that? What if you studied Dave's life and body of work as if he were a legendary artist like Charlie Parker or Kendrick Lamar, or even an intellectual like Frederick Douglass? Because I think Dave Chappelle deserves to be treated in that way. There's an incredible amount of meaning and depth packed into his career, along with the pussy jokes.
This is pussy juice.
So let's see what Dave Chappelle's body of work looks like when you approach it as more than just the work of a joke teller.
Well, you're an iconic figure.
Yeah.
I'm a pop culture figure. That's much different.
I don't know. Sometimes the iconic figure began as a pop culture.
There you go. That's a good point.
In 2002, Dave Chappelle co-created Chappelle's Show with Neil Brennan, which would go on to become one of the most successful sketch comedy shows of all time. But in the middle of filming the third season, he abandoned his $50 million contract and went to South Africa for a few weeks. I already made a video about why Dave Chappelle left his show on Comedy Central. I talked about an analogy he made in his special The Bird Revelation. In the analogy, Chappelle is a prostitute, his sex work is his work on Chappelle's Show, and his pimps are the Hollywood executives who manipulated him into overworking under abusive conditions.
I do Chappelle Show 20 hours a day. Sleep for like half an hour, raise my kids for 10, 20 minutes, and I go back to work.
It wasn't fun at all. It was hard. We'd have to stay awake for 48 hours at a time just to keep up with the schedule. We were bombed out and depleted. We were lumped up.
According to The Bird Revelation, Chappelle left the show because of that unbearable schedule and to the psychological abuse executives used to try to keep him going.
Why the fuck you think most of us work from 9 to 5?
96 might kill a bitch.
But Chappelle has also mentioned other reasons for quitting.
He wondered about its impact on the audience that he meant it for.
He felt disturbed at how some white audience members misread his racial humor.
Somebody on set that was white laughed in such a way. I know the difference of people laughing with me and people laughing at me. And it was the first time I'd ever gotten a laugh that I was uncomfortable with. White people would come up to me like, man, that sketch you did about them niggers, that was hilarious. Take it easy. You start to realize these sketches in the wrong hands are dangerous.
Really, there wasn't one singular reason for him to leave.
I wasn't walking away from money. I was walking away from the perfect storm of bullshit.
And unsurprisingly, the media didn't understand the nuance of his decision, with mainstream outlets circulating crazy, unfounded claims about his disappearance.
And they're saying, maybe I smoked crack, and it was all innuendo. And the magazine as credible as Newsweek, I was very surprised.
The media didn't see that his decision wasn't a meltdown, but rather a calculated personal decision that defined his identity going forward.
Whenever I hear he fled to South Africa, I'm like, man, I walked out. I walked like John Wayne.
Comparing himself to John Wayne shows that Chappelle sees his decision as more significant than just leaving a job he didn't like. Like John Wayne disappearing into the wilderness in The Searchers, Chappelle exercised complete control despite his uncertain destiny.
Name your price in the beginning. If it ever gets more expensive than the price you name, get out of there. Thus, Africa.
There's a long tradition of African American icons visiting Africa and undergoing a transformation.
Everybody should go home to Africa. I see all colors of people doing everything. And the voice said, do you see any niggas? I say, no. I say, you know why? Because there aren't any. And it hit me like a shot, man. I started crying and shit.
On this pilgrimage, what I have seen and experienced has forced me to rearrange much of my thought patterns previously held and to toss aside some of my previous conclusions.
I tell you, hear a lot of black people say this, like when you go to Africa, especially your first time, you have this overwhelming feeling like you're home, which is true. I had that feeling like, man, this feels like home.
And like in the narratives of other prominent black figures, Chappelle presents his journey to Africa as a profound, teachable moment in his life that protested against the hostilities of show business and racial injustice.
I feel like I'm gonna be some kind of parable by either what you're supposed to do or what you're not supposed to. I'm gonna be something. I'm either gonna be a legend or just that tragic story, but I'm going full throttle. I'm going all the way.
His choice to go to South Africa and the way he talks about that choice clearly shows he sees his decision as more meaningful than just a career move. Even now, after leaving show business for 10 years, he presents his life as a parable, a narrative to learn from, and in doing so, he elevates his story into myth.
The baboons always have a secret supply of water, and they're not going to tell anybody where it is.
I watched one of these nature shows one time, and they were talking about how a bushman finds water when it's scarce. And they do what's called a salt trap.
First, he laboriously drills a hole in a giant ant heap when he is sure a baboon is watching him, because he knows baboons are incurably inquisitive.
So they put a lump of salt in a hole, and they wait for the baboon. The baboon comes, sticks his hand in the hole, grabs the salt, salt makes his hand bigger, and he's trapped. He can't get his hand out. Now, if he's smart, all he does is let go of the salt. Baboon doesn't want to let go of the salt.
Now he lets go when it's too late.
Then the bushman just comes, takes the baboon, and gives him all the salt he wants. You know, when you're a guy that generates money, people have a vested interest in controlling.
In fact, he has such a ball eating salt that he completely forgets he's under arrest, and that in a little while he's going to be a mighty thirsty baboon.
But you know what kills more black people than anything, more than police and terrorism? Salt, nigga, regular ass table salt.
The baboon gets thirsty, the bushman lets him out the cage.
He decides the brainwashing has worked, so he sets him free, knowing that in his condition he won't care who follows him to the secret reservoir.
But I wasn't paying attention. I felt really guilty about being asleep at the wheel. The first place the baboon runs to is water. Bushman follows him, and they both drink to their fill. And in that analogy, I felt like the baboon. But I was smart enough to let go of the salt.
If he had the sense to drop the seed, he could free his hand.
I want to give the money to someone that's not exploiting me. The machine is good for us, and we good for the machine, and it should be fair, man. It should be fair.
You know what?
It's been 10 years since the last time I played Los Angeles.
In 2017, Chappelle released his first 2 post-Chappelle Show concert films on Netflix, Deep in the Heart of Texas and The Age of Spin. While they don't linger much on his past controversies with Chappelle Show, they do acknowledge they're still on his mind.
It was a difficult 10 years. I'm not going to take you through all the agony I've been through.
The specials don't speak much to the Dave Chappelle narrative. That may be because he shot the specials without any streaming deal, and Netflix bought them later.
I literally just took them out of the closet like,
They're both well-made and funny specials, and they gave the world a reintroduction to Chappelle, and primarily served to show he's still got it. And by omitting the controversy of him quitting Chappelle's Show and leaving show business for 10 years, the specials also create dramatic tension. Everybody still wants to know how all that affected him. He resolves that tension in his next 2 specials, Equanimity and The Bird Revelation. These specials clearly seek to address the demons from his Chappelle Show days. One clue is their titles. The first is called Equanimity, which means an evenness of mind, especially under stress. His very first joke makes it clear that his comedy is now in his hands.
And after this shit, it's time to make America wait again.
The entire opening shows a comedian who understands his talent and knows how to resist the force of others.
You know, if you black in show business and do too well, it's scary, nigga. Like, you gotta get the fuck out of the casino while the getting's good, while you're still winning.
If Equanimity reflects a comedian in control, then the following special shows how he got there. This next special feels much more intimate, and it's my personal favorite. It's called The Bird Revelation, and that title actually has multiple meanings. The first interpretation relates to the prostitution analogy at the end of the special. The word bird is slang for a girl, and Dave knows that. He even uses the word bird in this way during a sketch on Chappelle's Show.
It's a bird. One of those that you just bring home and wear out.
That is correct. A bird that you bring home and wear out.
The bird revelation, then, is Dave having the revelation that while at Chappelle's Show, he was the bird getting worn out.
That's the motherfucking Capitalist Manifesto. And that's why I went to South Africa.
Another interpretation of the title has to do with the quote at the beginning of the special, "I came alive, I could fly." This quote was supposedly said by Charlie Parker after he realized a completely new way to play music. Charlie Parker's nickname was Bird, hence the Bird Revelation. This second meaning also relates to Chappelle's career. Like Charlie Parker, Chappelle realized he could do his art form in a completely new way. After years of leaving comedy, he has come back completely differently. Now he can make comedy without the executives who pushed him too far. In short, he's free.
At first it was scary. Now I feel like it's liberating. Like, I feel free, like I can just say what I want to do. They already call me crazy.
The narrative of the life of Dave Chappelle is defined by one word: freedom. Chappelle is no longer bound by the will of executives and can now work on his own terms. And there's really no other comedian with the level of freedom that Dave Chappelle has.
You know, I got the corporate relationships and the CEO hat and the companies. So, you know, I can't do certain things.
And then Kevin said, fuck it, I quit. And then he went on every talk show in America and apologized for 6 weeks.
I'm envious and jealous of Dave's ability to go and be free as a comic in the times where we desperately need to be.
I'm gonna go to Africa. I'm gonna find a way to be myself. I'm an artist, man. I don't need a sneaker deal.
That's why I don't have a sneaker deal, because if you say something that people don't like, they'll take your fucking shoes off.
Chappelle truly does whatever he wants. Sometimes it feels like he breaks the rules just to remind us that he can.
I should also tell you that I skipped rehearsal. During the civil rights movement, I can't read what's on the teleprompter. And I want everyone in America right now to look at me. Look at me smoking indoors. I didn't ask anybody, I just did it. What are they gonna do? Kick me out before I get the prize? No, nigga, this is called leverage.
Everyone embraces Chappelle's ability to resist the pulls of show business, especially in an era where show business has received a huge amount of completely warranted criticism. But those aren't the only people Chappelle doesn't want controlling him.
And I don't care when I find out. Could be today, tomorrow, 15, 20 years from now. If I find out you're fucking finished, that's you. That's what the audience sounds like to me.
The title of his latest special, Sticks and Stones, has a pretty clear meaning. Chappelle is reminding us that criticisms of him aren't going to hurt him or his comedy. And in classic Dave Chappelle fashion, he references other black provocateurs to explain what he's doing. First, in the opening quote.
Tell me something, you motherfuckers can't tell me nothing. I'd rather die than to listen to you. My DNA not for imitation.
And then, even more explicitly, he quotes Prince lyrics that essentially summarize his entire argument.
And this is the bar of the whole song. Prince say, trying to run from my destruction, you know I didn't even care.
As Maureen Callahan noted, he is telling us that he is willing to not just destroy, but be destroyed. If you consider Chappelle's career up to this point, his decision to continue telling destructive jokes about things he already got backlash for should come as no surprise. Chappelle isn't just telling jokes, he's making a broader point. Just like when he actively resists the rules of show business, he also resists bowing down to criticism, to remind us that his comedy will always be his and his alone. Whether it's TV executives or his audience, Chappelle will fight back against any attempt to restrict what he says. Some people prefer Chappelle's older comedy over his recent work, and I totally get that. His first two specials, Killing Them Softly and For What It's Worth, are easily two of the best comedy shows of all time, but I do enjoy how his more recent work incorporates the narrative of his life into his performances, and sometimes he also adds his experience to the work of other performers. A perfect example is Chappelle's interruption of Kendrick Lamar's performance during the Grammys in 2018.
I'm Dave Chappelle, and I just wanted to remind the audience that the only thing more frightening than watching a black man be honest in America is being an honest black man in America. Sorry for the interruption. Please continue.
This theatrical interruption is full of meaning, speaking specifically to the nature of black artistry in the United States. The fact that Chappelle introduces himself feels almost funny, since everybody clearly knows who he is. But that introduction emphasizes that these are not words coming from just anybody. They're coming from Dave Chappelle, another honest black man in America. His presence becomes an authoritative comment on the obstacles and risks of a black man performing his art without holding back.
It looks like he's singing and dancing, but this brother's taking enormous chances.
And in the same way that Kendrick Lamar is not just singing and dancing, Dave Chappelle is not just telling jokes. In 846, Dave Chappelle heavily criticizes the conservative commentator Candace Owens.
She's the worst. I can't think of a worse way to make money.
And Owens responded that people need to be able to laugh at themselves, so she's okay with Chappelle talking about her that way. In the end, she probably would have made the criticism worse if she fought back. There's really no good way to respond to a comedian acting freely and truthfully, because if you accept that comedians can say anything, then you have to accept that criticism when it's directed at you, even if it's brutal. But if you disagree with what a comedian says, then you can be criticized for taking them too seriously, and nobody plays both of these sides more than Dave Chappelle. Sometimes he's just telling jokes that don't mean anything, and sometimes he's telling hard truths that mean a lot, and he's also doing everything in between. His latest special, 846, and his performance at the Grammys confirm that he's not just a comedian, but also not just a thought leader. He's both, and full of contradictions. Like, do people care what he has to say, or not?
I know nobody gives a fuck what I think anyway. The only reason people want to hear from people like me is because you trust me.
Is he telling it like it is, or is he just messing around?
I was right once. Remember that?
I didn't come here to be right. I came here to fuck around.
Is he a thought leader, or is he just telling jokes?
I pride myself on saying real shit that people don't even notice I'm saying. And then sometimes I just tell shit jokes. That's the beauty of it.
There's even something kind of strange about this video, taking Dave Chappelle very seriously despite the fact that some of his comedy is just plain silly.
There's not enough stovetop stuffing for everybody.
So I kicked her in the pussy.
But that is the beauty of Dave Chappelle. He lives in this limbo between jokes and sincerity, and he can effortlessly move between them. If he's really a legend, then his work deserves to be treated like art. But if he's also a hilarious comedian, then his work doesn't need to be treated like art at all. You can just laugh at it. His comedy is simultaneously a joke and more than just a joke. Serious and not serious, offensive and not offensive.
My favorite book of all time, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass.
Dave Chappelle has an intimate connection with the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass.
To my knowledge, the first black person that was officially invited to the White House was Frederick Douglass. I talked about how few black people were invited to the White House, how Frederick Douglass was the first, and that it didn't happen again till Roosevelt.
That was wrong. It happened one other time before that. That delegation was led by the AME Bishop, William David Chappelle. It's where I get my name. It was my great-grandfather, who was a slave when he was born.
And not only does Chappelle's lineage have similarities with Douglas, but they also both create narratives out of their life stories. The exact phrasing of the title of Douglas's memoir is crucial. It's not titled The Life of Frederick Douglass, but rather The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. His first memoir has a lot of thematic similarities with other slave narratives. The story functions not just as a recounting of Frederick Douglass's life, but also a story that fits into the greater narrative of overcoming slavery in the American South. According to historian James Olney, these narratives have three key elements: literacy, identity, and freedom. Slaves learn to read and write in difficult situations, invent a new social identity for themselves, and live their lives as free men and abolitionists. Olney's most interesting claim is that these narrative elements actually occur past slavery and into African American literature in the Jim Crow era, with stories like Black Boy and the autobiography of Malcolm X addressing similar ideas of learning to educate oneself, reinventing one's own identity, and advocating for freedom from oppression. Dave Chappelle embraces his relationship with Frederick Douglass, and in many ways, Chappelle's story has parallels with that traditional Afro-American narrative. His literature is his artistry as a comic, his identity is the independence he declared by going to Africa, and his freedom is advocating to say what he wants on stage.
He knows who he is, right?
And he's not compromising.
And no one can tell him any different.
I understand what I am. I really do, more than anybody.
When's we gonna be free?
That is a good question, my man. How about nowish?
Dave Chappelle tells his story by recontextualizing it in the stories of other African American figures, whether it's through a pimp in the 40s, Frederick Douglass visiting the White House, or Kendrick Lamar. He finds a commonality in these stories, and that commonality elevates his story and his career to that of a legend. The vast majority of articles or videos about Dave Chappelle analyze his jokes, but I think that sells his career short. Obviously, his comedy is amazing, but within his comedy specials, he also contextualizes his artistry. He celebrates other black intellectuals to elevate the meaning of his career choices, and by doing so, he becomes an intellectual in his own right. Dave Chappelle is an amazing comedian because he has some amazing jokes, but it's what he says between those jokes that makes him legendary.
This is not funny at all. I got some pussy jokes too I could do, but I
released this video on October 27th, which is officially Dave Chappelle Day in the city of DC where I live. So how does he want us to celebrate?
In the future, on Dave Chappelle Day, I ask everyone who wishes to celebrate it to make one incredible memory for themselves and or somebody else.
Or maybe do it a different way.
From now on October 27th, everybody in honor of me at Duke Ellington skip school.
Dave Chappelle's comedy highlights countless black artists, and he also frequently highlights important historical events in the black community, like the crack epidemic, the civil rights movement, and the HIV pandemic. In fact, one of Chappelle's first on-screen appearances was to rap about AIDS awareness.
It hits men and women and the young ladies.
If you want to be like young Dave Chappelle and support combating HIV, then a company I recommend for you to check out is Adam & Eve. Adam & Eve is an adult store that donates 20% of their profits to help fight the spread of HIV around the world. Go to adamandeve.com and use the code C at checkout to get 50% off one item and free shipping in the US and Canada. They have discreet shipping and 90-day no-hassle returns. A big thanks to Adam & Eve for sponsoring this video, and a big thanks to our supporters on Patreon, who got early access to this video and have access to our new podcast, Now You Hear It. In each episode, my co-creator Andrew and I break down our video, discuss related topics, and talk about the things that couldn't fit into a YouTube video. You can check out the first episode for free in the link below, and if you like it, head to our Patreon to get access to all the subsequent episodes, including this week's new episode about Dave Chappelle. Thanks for watching.